Hello, I'm Anthony Hughes, and in Dorico 4.3 we are introducing a revolutionary new feature that generates notes for any collection of instruments following the chord symbols in your music. You can influence the notes created by specifying existing rhythms and melodic lines, and Dorico will produce well-voiced chords with a multitude of configurable options to control voice leading, parallel and contrary motion, cadential resolution, and more. It can really kickstart an arrangement, instantly fleshing out parts in a way that is technically achievable by performers. At its heart, the feature is extremely easy to use. Make a selection of any number of instruments in your project across a region that contains chord symbols. Right-click and choose Chord Symbols and Diagrams, Generate Notes from Chord Symbols. Press OK and watch in wonder and awe as Dorico fills that selection with notes in a musically and technically adept way. Let's dive into the detail so you can quickly get the best results you need for different musical situations. So perhaps the place to start is looking at selecting the instruments to generate notes for. You can click and shift-click bars and staves to select a region to use, but the selection doesn't need to be contiguous. You can control-click, that's command-click on Mac, to select non-adjacent staves. If you're looking to generate notes across your entire ensemble, or thereabouts, you can just select across all instruments and invoke the dialog. Dorico will automatically divide your ensemble into blending groups that it will use to apportion notes from each chord. For example, this group of woodwind instruments that will be considered on its own and for which a complete realization of each chord will be generated. These blending groups are amassed by Dorico automatically in order to be sure that the harmony of the chord symbols can be fully realized and therefore cannot be modified. You might prefer to make several passes over the music, generating a set of notes for specific sections of your ensemble. And that way you can make the most of the various options we're about to cover, creating an arrangement with specific qualities. For example, selecting just the instruments in the string section. When you make your selection, you do not have to select the chord symbols themselves. And if there are local chord symbols for any instruments, then Dorico will take those into account when generating notes. The command can be summoned by the jump bar, and if this is a feature you think you might use frequently, you can assign it a key command or a jump bar alias. I've created an alias of GN, meaning I can simply make my selection and then type J and GN to quickly invoke the dialog. The dialog has many sections, including some that appear only when certain types of instruments are present in the selection, for example, keyboard or fretted instruments. Let's look at each one in turn. The first section is Notate Rhythm, and here you can choose the rhythm that Dorico will use when generating notes. You can create just one note per bar or a note for every beat of the time signature. Regardless of which you choose here, new notes will be created at each chord change. However, if there is some music already present at the rhythmic position of your selection, you can use this music as the rhythm for your newly generated notes. This music doesn't need to be in one of the instruments you have selected, rather just at the same point in time. Now this new option to use existing rhythm becomes available, and you can choose the source instrument from the drop-down. When you press OK, the notes are generated to that specified rhythm. What's even better is that a rhythm can be entered in just the first bar or so, and Dorico will repeat it throughout the selection and the notes it creates. You can even interrupt a repeating rhythm at any point with a new rhythm, after which Dorico will return to using the original one. The next section is about blending and bass notes. Within each automatic group, you can reorder the instruments to influence the arrangement of notes in the chord. For example, here you may wish to have the oboe playing higher notes than the clarinet. Some instruments will be automatically assigned to playing the bass note of each chord. These will typically be the lower sounding instruments, such as double basses and tubas and so on. You can optionally set other instruments to play bass notes. Perhaps here you might like cellos and basses to be playing together. You can also influence the top line of any arrangement. If you know what you want to be the top notes across a section, you can input these and then tell Dorico to assign them to the highest instrument in your selection. Again, this music does not need to be in your selection. You can refer to music in another instrument. There are controls for setting how spread out the notes in your new chords can be by configuring the largest permissible intervals, and you can allow a little extra movement for the top line. The defaults here are actually controlled by a note input option, but it's useful to be able to control these on a per case basis. The options at the bottom of the dialog apply when using an existing rhythm and can be used to change harmony in what can sometimes be a slightly more natural way, either just before or just after the actual chord symbol. Look at this section here with an offbeat rhythm tied over the bar that we're going to use to influence our generated notes. It would be nice to have the harmony move on this note just before the chord change at the start of the bar. So I shall choose to use the violin 1 rhythm, and then in the options, choose to anticipate a chord symbol change when a note overlaps that change. Press OK and see how the chord changes just ahead of the chord symbol. Conversely, you can also set options here to defer chord changes until the next note after a chord symbol, or indeed change the defined rhythm to ensure the harmony moves directly in step with the chord symbol changes. If you have a polyphonic instrument in your selection, such as a piano or harp, you can choose the minimum and maximum number of notes to allocate to those instruments. For example, you might want to specify full 4 or 5 note chords for your piano, whereas even though Dorico knows, for example, a marimba player potentially can hold 2 mallets in each hand, you might want to restrict that to just 1 mallet in each hand in this instance. Fretted instruments also bring their own settings. You can choose to prefer using Dorico's library of familiar chord shapes, or you might like to try auto-generating shapes, which can lead to stronger voice leading. Other options here let you specify the number of notes in each chord that is used in conjunction with Dorico's knowledge about how many strings your fretted instruments have. As you might expect, the amount of work Dorico is doing here behind the scenes to create harmonic arrangements with proper sense of musical rules and preferences is immense. Indeed, in one of my tongue-in-cheek Christmas videos a few years ago, I jokingly suggested Dorico might be able to warn against using parallel fifths and octaves. Well, our Generate Notes from Chord Symbols feature has all of this intelligence driving it from within. And in order to make it suitable and usable for the wide variety of music that we want you to be able to create, all of that intelligence is presented in a controllable way via an immense array of note input options. There is an almost inconceivable amount of control here, letting you dive into how Dorico will approach parallelism and contrary motion, how to resolve certain harmonies at cadences, and how to position and spread chords in many different situations. And I hope that you quickly find your own uses for this feature. It's designed as a starting point for your arrangements, rather than removing the need for your existing training, skill, and experience. But just see how easy it can be, for example, to record a passage using a MIDI keyboard. Using Dorico's existing feature to generate chord symbols for that passage, and then generating notes to create a quick string section accompaniment. You can even combine it with some of Dorico 4.3's other new features, such as selecting your new string notes and pressing Alt-U to divide them into shorter repeating notes. I'd love to hear how you're using the feature in the comments below. And why don't you subscribe to our YouTube channel right now, hitting the bell button to be notified of all our new videos. I've made a couple of other videos all about the new features in Dorico 4.3, so please remember to check those out as well. I'm Anthony Hughes. Thanks for watching.